Hi, I'm Odellin. They invited me to my sister's promotion party, but forgot to put my name on the guest list again. Then they laughed at my daughter's handmade gift, called me used, and toasted to my failures with champagne. But that night didn't end the way they planned. Someone stood up, and when they did, the entire room finally looked at me. What happens when the silent one stops stepping aside? Before we dive in, tell me, have you ever been left out by your own family? Let us know in the comments. I was rinsing out Mira's lunchbox when I heard the mailbox clang shut. It was past 6, and the late Texas sun was slanting through the blinds, lighting up the dull laminate countertops like they were lined with gold. For a second, I let myself enjoy the moment. Quiet, ordinary mine. Then I saw the envelope on top of the junk mail. It was cream-colored with silver print, the kind of fancy stationery only one person in the family ever used. The kind that whispered, "You're invited, but don't forget your place." I didn't even need to open it. I already knew. But I did anyway. And there it was, in bold serif font. "You're cordially invited to celebrate Callista's promotion to Vice President of Client Experience." Underneath, Miss Odelia Shipker and guest. Odelia. They got my name wrong. Again. The correction could have been a simple text. One line. But they didn't bother. Because to them, I was the typo. I tucked the envelope behind the cereal box before Mira saw it. She was still humming to herself in the living room, building a paper rocket out of a toilet paper tube. I leaned against the sink and stared at the floor. My name wasn't long, or hard to spell. Just unimportant. That's what it really said. I went to bed late that night, after cleaning up the last glue-covered popsicle stick. I told myself it didn't matter. I didn't even have to go. No one would miss me if I didn't show. But by morning, guilt had already taken up its usual seat at the breakfast table. "Mommy, what's this?" Mira asked, her small fingers clutching the RSVP card I'd stupidly left out. "Are we going to Aunt Callie's party?" She looked so excited. Her bangs stuck up in all directions, and her pajamas were 2 inches too short, but she was grinning like she'd just won a golden ticket. I paused. She was 6. She didn't remember the last party. She didn't know that Grandma once made a toast about how impressive it was to raise a child on expired yogurt. She didn't hear the laughter. She didn't feel the shame that stuck to me like smoke from someone else's fire. "I guess we are," I said quietly, brushing toast crumbs off her cheek. Because I couldn't stand the look she'd have given me if I said no. It was always like this. My desire to be done with them warred with the tiny hope that maybe, this time, it would be different. That maybe someone would say, "It's good to see you. I'm glad you came," and mean it. That night, while Mira slept curled in a nest of stuffed animals, I got a message from my mother. "Please don't make this night about you. Just smile, be polite, and don't bring up old stuff. Callista worked very hard for this." That was it. No greeting. No, "How are you?" Just orders. Like I was a risk. A crack in the glossy surface they didn't want anyone to see. I stared at the screen for a long time, letting her words press against my chest like something heavy. I wanted to reply, to ask her if she'd ever thought about why I stopped showing up in the first place. But I didn't. I just deleted it. Then I pulled my dress from the back of the closet, the only one formal enough to blend in but plain enough not to stand out. The side zipper was still broken. I had to shimmy into it and pin the seam with a safety clip. I ironed it anyway, hands trembling a little from the effort of staying composed. In the bathroom with the door shut, I let the silence wrap around me. That's when it hit. The thing I always tried to push down, the ache of wanting to belong to people who didn't want me back. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the cracked tile near my feet, and cried as quietly as I could. Not because I was sad, not really, but because hope, when it gets too small, starts to hurt like a splinter you can't dig out. The next morning, the sun poured in earlier than I wanted. I hadn't really slept. Mira danced into the kitchen wearing her glitter sneakers and a tutu over her leggings. "Surprise!" she shouted, holding up a crooked piece of paper folded into fourths. Inside was a hand-drawn card, complete with stick figures and a pink heart. Above it in purple marker, "To the best mommy, you're my boss." I didn't say anything. I just pulled her close and held on a little longer than I needed to. She looked up. Can we bring cookies for the party? The ones with sprinkles? Of course we can, I said, even though I knew they'd probably end up on a table full of gift baskets and corporate wine bottles. But she wanted to give something, and I wasn't going to teach her that giving only counts if people clap for it. We packed them in a small tin. Mira insisted on decorating it with dinosaur stickers, and I placed it gently in the tote bag next to a travel pack of wipes and her favorite book for the car ride. As I buckled her into her booster seat, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. There I was, hair tied back, lipstick barely on, eyes a little puffy. You're not here to be liked, I whispered. You're here to be kind. To her. It's what I told myself. But the truth? I didn't fully believe it. Because somewhere, buried deep under the practiced smile and the layered silence, I still wanted to be seen. We pulled into the downtown Austin garage 20 minutes before the event was supposed to start. Mira had fallen asleep on the ride over, her face still sticky from the sprinkle cookies she insisted on tasting. I parked in a spot tucked far in the back, no valet today, not for us, and gently nudged her awake. By the time we stepped out of the elevator onto the rooftop level, the hum of soft jazz and champagne clinks filled the air. The venue was breathtaking, marble accents, golden balloon arches, and a live string quartet playing a slower version of Ain't No Mountain High Enough. The sun hadn't fully set yet, but the orange glow reflected off the skyline glass panels like fire frozen mid-motion. Mira gasped and spun in her little dress. Mommy, it looks like a palace. I smiled at her, adjusting her cardigan. It's fancy, huh? She nodded with a wide grin. I led us past the check-in table, where a young man with a Bluetooth earpiece barely glanced up as he handed me a program. Just follow the sign for table assignments, he mumbled. I walked toward the main tables. There were 12 round ones close to the stage, each labeled with elegant gold placards. Family, executives, close friends, college mentors. I scanned each name card. I wasn't there. A moment later, a woman in all black with a clipboard tapped my shoulder. Ma'am, you're Odellin? I hesitated, then nodded. Table 14, she said, motioning toward the far end of the rooftop. Down the walkway, just past catering. Past catering? She walked away before I could ask anything else. We weaved through the crowd. People in designer shoes, silk jumpsuits, men wearing blazers, even in the sticky evening heat. I caught snippets of conversations, promotion buzzwords, startup valuations, someone mentioning seed funding round 3. Finally, we arrived at our table. It wasn't on the deck with the others. It was near a service hallway, next to a rolling cart of extra glasses and stacked banquet chairs. A temporary white folding table, not even matching the others. A printed sign read, Table 14, Overflow, Overflow. It felt like being filed under miscellaneous. The other seats were already half filled. A vendor from the lighting company, someone's spouse, a teenage cousin I didn't recognize, and 2 interns still trying to figure out where to put their gift bags. I introduced Mira with a soft smile and pulled out a chair for her. One of the interns leaned toward me and asked, You with the photographer crew? I blinked. No, I'm family. He nodded politely, the kind of nod that didn't ask follow-ups. I pulled Mira's gift tin from my tote and placed it at the edge of the table. She reached for a breadstick. Mommy, when's the cake? I glanced at the stage. The staff was setting up a projection screen. Soon, baby, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Across the room, I spotted Callista, center stage, surrounded. She wore a navy blue jumpsuit that shimmered under the lights. Someone handed her a flute of champagne. Her laugh rang out like a bell. When she finally spotted me, she paused, then walked over, poised as ever. Oh, wow, she said, her voice cool. You came. That's unexpected. I didn't bother asking what she meant. I'd been unexpected my whole life. Then she turned to Mira. Hey, sweetie, still into coloring? She asked, her tone shifting to sugary sweet. Mira nodded. I made cookies. Before I could add anything, a tall woman with box braids and a sleek pantsuit joined us. Jasmine, Callista beamed. Come meet my niece. She's adorable. She placed a hand on Mira's shoulder. There was a pause. Then Callista added, almost like an afterthought, "Oh, and that's her mom." Just that. Not my sister, not Odellin, her mom. Jasmine smiled. "Oh, you work with kids too?" My mouth went dry. Mira tugged my hand. I just nodded once, the lie easier than explaining my entire family history in 30 seconds. "That's nice," Jasmine said. "Takes patience." I gave a tight smile. "Yes, it does." Jasmine turned to Callista and launched into a story about onboarding new clients. I faded from the conversation like a curtain drawn too far from the spotlight. Back at table 14, the program began. The screen displayed a scrolling montage, photos of Callista on international trips, ribbon-cutting ceremonies, smiling with teams in matching branded polos. The caption read, "To the women who lead with vision, power, and grace." Mira clapped. I didn't. I stared at the screen, at her name. Centered, backlit, celebrated. My own name had been left off a table card. Again. My gaze dropped to my heels. The leather was cracked along the sides. I'd worn them for job interviews, parent-teacher nights, once to a funeral. But never a place like this. Never somewhere I was expected to be proud of someone who forgot I helped her rise. Mira tapped my arm. "Mommy, are you sad?" I looked down at her wide eyes. My voice caught in my throat. "No, baby, I'm just remembering something." A library printer. A worn-out resume template. The night I stayed up past midnight typing bullet points for Callista's first internship application, while she went out drinking with her sorority friends. No one ever thanked me. Not once. A photographer passed by and paused. "Could you step aside? I need the sign in the background." I moved. Mira held my hand, and just before I stepped away completely, I whispered under my breath, "One day, I won't be the one stepping aside." The MC called for everyone's attention just as twilight settled across the Austin skyline. The last rays of sun were fading behind glass towers, and fairy lights twinkled above us like they'd been strung just to disguise how cold this gathering truly was. The voice through the speakers was confident, almost too smooth. "Tonight, we celebrate the incomparable journey of Callista Vaughn, newly appointed Vice President of Marketing." Polite applause. I felt Mira squeeze my hand, excited. "It's her big night, right, Mommy?" I nodded, lips tight. The screen behind the small podium lit up, and the pre-recorded message from Callista's CEO played. He called her a rising force, praised her visionary approach, and credited her with transforming outdated systems. I almost laughed at that last part, because the real transformation had started back in our shared bedroom when I taught her how to format a resume and how to write a subject line that didn't sound like a scam. But none of that was part of tonight's slideshow. Then came Callista's manager, a man in his late 50s who kept referring to her as our golden girl. Next, Callista took the mic. The crowd leaned forward. Cameras were lifted. I sat up straighter. She started well, thanking the company, her team, her mentors. Her voice was smooth, polished, practiced. "And of course," she continued, raising her champagne glass, "I have to acknowledge my older sister." Mira lit up. "That's you!" My heart thumped. I tried not to hold my breath. Callista smiled, wide, bright, like she was about to offer something meaningful. "The strongest woman I know, a single mom, resilient, tireless." I sat taller, and clearly unwanted by anyone else. Laughter, a full beat of it. Some gasped and laughed harder because of the shock. Others laughed like it was the best joke they'd heard all night. Some just looked around awkwardly, unsure whether to join in. I didn't move. I couldn't. My hands froze around the water glass, slick with condensation. Mira's smile dropped. She turned to me, confusion written all over her little face. "Why are they laughing at you, Mommy?" I couldn't speak. My jaw clenched, and I stared ahead, every muscle in my body telling me to run. But I didn't. I stayed seated like a statue at table 14, next to catering bins and ignored interns. Callista moved on like nothing happened. And now the real celebration can begin. More applause. I thought it was over. I prayed it was. But then I heard my mother's voice pierce the air from her seat at the front. "She's a used product," Isolde called out, raising her glass. "But hey, Still polishes up well." The laughter this time was louder, heartier, no hesitations. I blinked. Mira's lip trembled. She turned her face away, her small fingers gripping mine like a lifeline. I didn't cry. I wanted to, but I didn't. I just looked straight ahead, like I was watching a play about someone else's humiliation, the kind where you know how the story ends, and there's nothing you can do to stop it. No one came to check on me. No one told them to stop. They just laughed. The people I used to sit next to at Christmas, the ones who used to say, "Family comes first." Now they laughed as if I were the family joke. Someone clinked their glass, signaling the next speaker. But I didn't hear anything else. My ears were full of the high-pitched rush of blood, my heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. I looked at Mira. Her eyes were red, and she stared down at her lap, trying not to cry. I bent toward her. "We're okay," I whispered, though I wasn't sure if I was lying. I looked over at Callista. She was giggling with two women I didn't recognize, already halfway through her second glass of champagne. Isolde, still holding court, had her arm hooked around some distant cousin who probably thought she was hilarious. That was when the shift happened. Quiet, internal, but irreversible. For the first time in my life, I thought, not with sadness or self-pity, but with clarity. This isn't my family anymore. Mira still had the little frame in her lap. She'd spent 2 afternoons gluing sequins to its borders, sketching Callista in marker, complete with high heels, a red blazer, and what Mira called power hair. She'd even added a tiny gold crown sticker in the corner. "Because Aunt Callie's like a queen now," she'd told me with pride. She tugged on my arm gently, the way she always did when she wasn't sure if she was allowed to speak. "Can I give it to her now, Mommy?" I hesitated. A piece of me wanted to say no, to protect her from what I already knew would come next. But she was so eager, so proud of what she'd made. Denying her would only punish her kindness, and she'd already watched me be humiliated once tonight. So I nodded. "Go ahead, sweetheart." She beamed, cradled the wrapped gift in both hands like it was treasure, and skipped toward the front of the room. It took a moment to part through the crowd. She had to sidestep servers and duck past a trio of guests laughing over champagne flutes. But finally, she reached Callista, who was standing near the dessert table chatting with a few people I recognized vaguely from her social media posts. Mira tapped her aunt's elbow gently. Callista turned, glancing down. "Oh, hi," she said with a polite smile, eyes flicking from Mira to the gift. "I made this for you," Mira said proudly. "Congratulations." She held it out like it was a trophy. Callista didn't reach for it. Instead, she tilted her head and smiled that tight, hostess-style smile she always used when she didn't want to offend, but didn't really care either. "Aw, you're sweet," she said, then looked back toward her friends. "But I don't really have a place for handmade stuff in my condo. Very minimalist vibe." She patted Mira gently on the shoulder, like she was handing a puppy back to its owner. "Maybe your mom can keep it for you?" There was an awkward pause. Just long enough. A woman next to her muffled a laugh behind her hand. Another man cleared his throat, pretending to sip his drink, eyes darting away. Mira stood there, frozen, still holding the gift. Then she turned around slowly, her smile fading, and walked back toward me. Eyes wide, lips tight, trying not to cry in front of strangers. I didn't stand up to catch her. I was too busy trying not to explode. By the time she reached me and sat in my lap, her voice cracked. "Did I do something wrong?" I brushed her hair back. "No, baby," I whispered. "You were the only one who did something right." Before I could say anything else, the mic screeched slightly, and the MC took center stage again. "Okay, everyone," he chuckled into the microphone. "Let's keep the energy going. Don't worry, real gifts are coming up next, not glitter glue tributes." People laughed again, this time at my daughter. I didn't look at them. I looked at Mira. She was biting her lip, eyes locked on the cookie she'd decorated earlier and hadn't eaten. It sat on a napkin, untouched, as if it, too, had been rejected. I kissed her forehead and stood up just enough to pull her chair closer to mine. The frame sat between us now like a small, unclaimed secret. I took a sip of my water. My hand was shaking, from rage, from shame, from restraint. They didn't just make her feel small, they trained her to believe that being thoughtful was embarrassing, and the worst part? They thought it was funny. I glanced around the room. Callista was back to laughing, sipping champagne with a woman in a white jumpsuit who looked like she'd never handmade anything in her life. Isolde was scrolling through her phone, her smile smug like someone who thought they'd won a bet. And the rest of them? Nodding, laughing, complicit. No one stood up. No one said, "That was too far." No one offered Mira a kind word or even a glance of empathy. They just kept the party going. I leaned forward and whispered to Mira again, "We're going to leave soon." She nodded, pressing the frame against her chest like she didn't want to let it go. I sat there silently for a while, scanning every face in that room, memorizing the ones who laughed, the ones who looked away, the ones who would claim later they didn't hear it. But I heard, and Mira heard. And I wasn't going to forget. I'd always thought keeping the peace meant staying quiet. But peace doesn't mean humiliation. Peace doesn't mean watching your daughter learn she's not good enough in glitter. I wrapped my arm around her and whispered to myself under the hum of the music, under the sound of glasses clinking, "They're going to learn what happens when you laugh at the wrong person." It was somewhere between Callista's third champagne toast and the fourth round of shrimp crostini that I stood up to help Mira get a napkin. She'd gotten sauce on her fingers and didn't want to lick them in public. She whispered that last part to me like it was a state secret. As I bent over to grab napkins from the buffet table, I heard it. Rip. A sharp, dry sound. A pop from the past. I froze. The zipper on the side of my dress, the one I'd stitched by hand after it broke last winter, had split open, right under my ribs. My arm instinctively snapped to my side, fingers pinching fabric like I could somehow stitch it back together with sheer will. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I looked around. Nobody came to help, not one glance of concern. If anything, a few people noticed and deliberately turned away. The ones who always act like you're invisible until you're humiliated. Then suddenly you're worth watching. Mira noticed. Of course she did. She tugged off her little cardigan without saying a word and wrapped it around my waist, tying it into a lopsided bow with a shaky knot. "Now no one will see, Mommy," she whispered. "You still look pretty." That broke me. Not all at once, not the loud kind of break. It was a slow, crumbling thing, a heartbreak behind the eyes. I turned away from her and wiped my face with the inside of my elbow. I didn't want her to see me fall apart, not when she was the one patching me together with buttons and cotton sleeves. We walked back toward our table, her hand in mine, my steps slower than before. With each step, I could feel the split seam shift, my body pulling against it like a reminder. You don't belong here. Not even your clothes want to stay. As we passed through the center of the venue, I glanced up at the massive projection screen on the far wall. A photo loop was playing. Callista at a whiteboard. Callista shaking hands with her CEO. Callista smiling with a group of friends in front of the company banner. Then, there it was. The garage. Our parents' old house. 10 years ago. The day I helped her rehearse her very first pitch deck. I'd printed every slide, taped them to the wall. I was wearing sweats, holding a cup of coffee in one hand and a red marker in the other. In the original photo, I stood right beside her, our arms touching. But on the screen, I was cropped out, neatly, perfectly, as if I'd never been there at all. I felt my throat tighten, not in surprise, in recognition. They don't just want me quiet, I thought. They want me erased. I sat back down at table 14 and reached for the water glass. My hands were trembling again. Mira had returned to coloring on her napkin with a pink crayon she'd pulled from her tiny purse. She looked up. "I can tell you don't feel happy here," she said softly. "We can go." I opened my mouth. I wanted to say yes, to grab our things, walk out, and never look back. Let them toast each other's cruelty in peace. But then I looked at her. Really looked. She was learning something tonight. And if I left now, if I walked away silently again, what would she remember? That being kind means shrinking. That being ignored means you should disappear. I'd already taught her too much about silence. So I stayed. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed her to see that staying sometimes was the beginning of saying no. I watched Callista give another toast. Laughter erupted again near the champagne bar. My mother was sitting with a woman wearing pearls and fake empathy, nodding as if they had something to teach the room. Mira leaned her head on my arm. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Then I reached for my phone and opened a text thread I hadn't touched in a long time. I typed something, short, precise. Then I hit send. I slipped the torn seam deeper under the tablecloth and sat straighter in my chair. A server passed with a tray of flutes. "Champagne, ma'am?" I looked him in the eye. "Not tonight," I said. "I need a clear mind." He gave a polite nod and walked on. My voice was calm, but my eyes, they had just remembered who I was. The clink of glassware, bursts of laughter, and the polished murmur of corporate praise were still echoing when I returned to my seat. I folded the napkin neatly across my lap, not to protect the dress, but to cover the unraveling seam Mira had already tried to mend with her cardigan. I kept my face neutral, but I wasn't listening to the party anymore. Across the room, Arthur Delaney hadn't moved much. While everyone else laughed or raised glasses at Callista's second toast, he stood like a marble sculpture, still, unreadable. His gaze flickered now and then toward the crowd, but it often landed back on me. When Callista stepped off the makeshift podium, he approached her. Their exchange was brief, 10, maybe 12 seconds, but I caught the stiffening in her shoulders, the tight nod, the faint drop in her smile. Whatever he said didn't sit well. He didn't look at her the way others did, with flattery or fear. He looked skeptical, and that told me more than any applause ever could. Mira tugged on my hand and asked if we could get some air. I said yes, because I needed it too. We stepped out onto the balcony. The city was laid out beneath us like a glowing map, lights twinkling across downtown Austin. Cars moved like quiet rivers of red and white. Mira leaned against the railing, arms crossed. "Why does Aunt Callie get a party for her job, but you never did?" The question didn't sting. It hollowed. I thought for a second, then said quietly, "Because I used to believe that doing good work was enough." She tilted her head. "Is it not?" I didn't answer. There wasn't one I could give without betraying my own past naivety. 10 years ago, I was the one who told Callista about Arthur Delaney's hiring round for junior analysts. I was freelancing for a digital campaign firm back then, and I ran into him at a networking brunch. She had just been laid off from her sales job and was panicking. I slipped her name into the conversation, edited her resume that night, and prepped her for the interview like it was mine. She got the job. I got a generic thank you card that never mentioned my name. After that, she stopped mentioning me at all. And now here she was, the center of this celebration, floating through it like a crowned queen, while I was dressed in borrowed dignity and stitched together silence. I glanced at Mira, who was now spinning one of her curls between her fingers. She had no idea how many rooms I'd helped others enter, just by quietly handing them the key. Back inside, I took out my phone and opened a message thread I hadn't used in years. Professor Lattimore. She'd mentored me in grad school, then went on to chair a board for one of the fastest-growing clean tech funds in the state. Last I'd heard, she was attending the upcoming Civic Innovation Gala, where Arthur Delaney was slated to speak. I typed, "Hi, Dr. Lattimore. I'd love to reconnect at the Austin Civic Gala if you're still attending. Would be honored to reintroduce myself properly. Warmly, Odellin." I hit send. My heart picked up speed. Not from nerves, but from something different, something like purpose. For the first time all night, I wasn't reacting. I was initiating. Mira looked up as we re-entered the room, and I gave her a small nod. Her eyes relaxed, even though she didn't know what had just shifted inside me. We hadn't even taken 3 steps before Arthur glanced in our direction again. This time, I met his gaze. He didn't smile, just gave a subtle, respectful nod. Then he turned back to Callista, who was laughing too loudly at something someone said, and leaned in to whisper something again. I couldn't hear it, but it was enough to make her glance quickly toward the stage, the mic. Arthur gestured toward it. "Why don't we open it up?" The words carried across the room. A few guests turned their heads. One woman clapped slowly, unsure if it was the start of something or just filler between speeches. The crowd murmured, adjusting in their seats, the energy shifting, not with chaos, but anticipation. Something in the air had changed. Not overtly, not yet. But I felt it, and I think they did too. Something was shifting, not loud, but seismic. Arthur Delaney didn't raise his voice. He didn't clear his throat or tap the microphone for effect. He simply stepped forward, and the room followed him, like gravity had shifted just slightly in his direction. "I'd like to say a few words," he said, his voice even, smooth, as someone who's watched this journey unfold from the beginning. Polite applause, a few nods. A waiter paused mid-step. Callista's eyes lit up like she was about to be coronated. She turned slightly in her chair, elbow on the table, lips already curling into a poised smile. I didn't move. I just tightened my arm around Mira, who now leaned fully against me, warm and still. "Tonight," Arthur began, "we celebrate leadership, vision, achievement. But I want to speak briefly about recognition." He looked out over the crowd, not at the executives, not at the interns, straight at me. "There are people in this room who've done more behind the scenes than others have done on stage," he said. "And too often those contributions go unmentioned." A few heads turned. My mother stopped whispering. I saw Callista shift in her seat, shoulders tensing just enough to betray her polish. Arthur continued. "Tonight we honor one sister. But let's not forget who opened the door in the first place." There it was. No names. But the message landed like thunder. My hands remained folded in my lap. Mira's grip on me didn't loosen, and for once I didn't want it to. Then, from the back of the room, a soft voice broke the moment. "I'd like to say something too." Everyone turned. Eliana, a junior team member at Callista's firm. She stepped forward slowly, her hands trembling slightly at her sides. "I know this is a celebration," she began, "but I just want to acknowledge someone who changed my life." Callista smiled again, assumed it was about her. But Eliana didn't look at her. She looked at me. "Miss Shipka helped me during my mental health leave," she said, her voice growing firmer. "She sent me resources, checked in when no one else did. I was falling apart and she noticed." Callista started to interject. "That's touching, Eliana." But Eliana didn't even blink in her direction. "I never got to say this before," she said. "But thank you. You didn't know it, but you saved me." And then, for the first time all night, the applause was real. Not polite, not performative, just real. Not for Callista, for me. I didn't stand. I didn't bow my head. I just blinked slowly as the room shifted once more. Not in a loud, crashing way, but like something had finally tilted back to balance. Arthur stepped back up for one last moment. "Some of us work quietly," he said, "but the impact isn't smaller. It's just stronger over time." He descended the steps and, as he passed my table, he leaned slightly, whispering just loud enough for me to hear. "I have something for you, but not here." I looked up at him and nodded. Callista wasn't smiling anymore. She was still seated, but I could see her calculating, running back through conversations, trying to trace how the power had slipped out of her grasp. Mira turned to me, her eyes bright. "See?" she whispered. "You didn't need a big party to be seen." I didn't answer her. I just reached over, brushed a curl behind her ear, and watched the people who used to shrink me now shift in their chairs. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't stormed out. I'd stayed still. And in that stillness, the ground beneath them had begun to shake. As dessert trays began to weave between the tables and someone dimmed the lights to usher in a mood, Arthur leaned toward me and simply said, "Walk with me?" I didn't need to ask where or why. Mira gave my hand a soft squeeze and I nodded to her. "I'll be right back, baby. Sit tight." I followed Arthur out of the ballroom into the long hallway lined with sconces and photos from past corporate galas. The click of my low heels echoed louder than I'd expected. For a second, I was just relieved to breathe clean air again, away from the artificial scent of champagne and self-congratulation. But halfway down the corridor, I heard the sharp heel strike behind us. Of course, Callista. "What exactly are you doing?" she snapped, stepping between Arthur and me like she had every right to control the narrative. "You've made your point. Don't embarrass yourself further. Arthur stayed calm. His voice was measured. I'm giving credit where it's long overdue. Callista scoffed. You always act like she's this quiet genius. She's just someone who couldn't cut it in the real world, so she clung to the idea of being the kind one. I stared at her, not with rage anymore, but with something sharper, stillness. No, I replied evenly. I just stopped pretending that silence equals dignity. I chose to live with intention. You chose applause. She blinked, just once, but it was enough to know I'd finally said something she couldn't flip. Arthur gestured gently toward a nearby bench. This won't take long. He handed me a small, flat box, about the size of a paperback. Your daughter left this on the main table. I figured it wasn't meant to get lost. I opened it slowly. Inside was Mira's cardboard frame, slightly bent now from being moved around. Her drawing of Aunt Callie, smudged with glitter glue, still sat proudly in the center. But tucked behind it was something else, a folded document on thick paper. Arthur didn't speak. He just watched. I unfolded it. An official letter. An offer from a national nonprofit Arthur sat on the board of. They were launching a mentorship division focused on resilience in overlooked voices, and they wanted me to lead the pilot program. We need people who know how to endure, Arthur said, but more importantly, people who know how to rebuild. I stared down at Mira's frame. It didn't matter that the job offer was prestigious. What hit me was that this little gift, rejected earlier like it was nothing, was now carrying the weight of something far bigger. I held it close to my chest and nodded. Thank you. Don't thank me, he said. Just take what's already yours. We walked back to the ballroom. Inside, the slideshow had started looping again. But this time, it was different. Someone, Arthur maybe, or someone who'd quietly noticed, had replaced one of the centerpiece images. There we were, 10 years ago. A blurry garage photo, Callista mid-pitch and me next to her, whiteboard marker in hand, coaching her through the opening. No one had ever shown that photo publicly, until now. Beneath it, a new caption, The Real Beginning. Guests turned to the screen, then toward our table. Conversations fell quiet. Isolde looked like someone had shut off her oxygen. Callista stood frozen, half a breath from saying something but with nowhere left to point the story. No spotlight, just consequence. I made my way back to table 14, Mira hopping down from her chair. You ready? I asked. She nodded and slipped her small hand into mine. I turned to the nearest staffer and said, Thank you for helping tonight. You've all been wonderful. Then I glanced toward my mother. You don't have to say anything, I said gently. I already stopped listening. I didn't wait for a reply. Callista stood rigid as I passed, arms crossed tight over her chest like she was trying to hold in a storm. You'll always have the room, I said. But I have what matters. We walked toward the exit. Arthur nodded from near the bar, a small smile on his lips. At the threshold, Mira tugged the frame closer to her chest and whispered, Next time I want to make 2 of these. I smiled, finally, from someplace deeper than pride. There won't need to be a next time, baby. This was the last lesson. The venue's lights faded behind us as the car cut through the velvet dark. The road home was mostly empty, just long stretches of soft lamplight flickering across the windshield. Mira was asleep in the back seat, her head tilted slightly, still hugging the cardboard frame like it was treasure. I glanced at her through the rearview mirror. The faint glow of the dashboard lit her face. She was safe. She was enough. And I was finally enough for myself. There were no apologies as we left. No one chased after us with trembling hands or hushed regret. No one stopped us to say, I was wrong. But that silence, it didn't feel like erasure anymore. It felt like release. For so long, I had been gaslit into believing that closure needed to come wrapped in someone else's regret. But tonight, I realized it didn't. I used to wait for their sorry like it was oxygen, I whispered out loud, though no one was awake to hear it. And now, I'm breathing just fine without it. By the time we reached our small home in Round Rock, the moon had shifted halfway across the sky. I parked, turned off the engine, and just sat there a moment. I didn't rush to carry Mira in. I watched her sleep, gently, peacefully, like she knew we'd walked through something big. Inside, I placed the cardboard frame on the bookshelf in the living room. Not behind books or tucked in a drawer like before, centered. That small, glitter-smudge thing, once mocked, now reframed, wasn't just a child's craft. It was proof of love, of voice, of everything we were told didn't count. My phone buzzed. Eliana's name flashed across the screen. I hope you know, you started something tonight. No punctuation, just that. I replied with a single heart, then pulled out the folded offer letter from Arthur. I had read it twice at the venue but hadn't really seen it. This time, I circled the start date with a blue pen, drew a small star beside it, and tucked it in my kitchen drawer, on top of the bills. Somewhere between midnight and dawn, I dozed off on the couch. Mira had crawled onto my chest sometime in the night, her breath slow and steady against my collarbone. In the morning, sun poured into the kitchen. Not dramatic, just soft, like a reset. I was already up when Mira rubbed her eyes and wandered in. "Are we going back to Aunt Callie's again today?" she asked, voice still sleepy. I turned from the coffee pot and knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart," I said, brushing a curl off her forehead. "Next time we're going somewhere better." "Like Disneyland?" I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in weeks. "Something even better, a place where we don't have to shrink." She grinned, satisfied. I handed her a bowl of cereal, poured my coffee, and we sat at the small table, just the two of us. Quiet, present. There was no applause, no slideshow, no catered pastries, just the ordinary warmth of a morning that finally belonged to us. After breakfast, I walked her to school. She waved 3 times at the same teacher, and I waved too. Then I kept walking, around the corner to a cafe I used to hide in during my loneliest years. But today, I didn't sit in the back. I opened my laptop at a window seat, ordered a black coffee, and typed the subject line for a new proposal draft. Rewriting the blueprint. When resilience speaks first, I paused, looked out at the slow city traffic, the teenagers waiting for the bus, the barista dancing as he restocked cups behind the counter. Then I heard my own voice in my head, soft but unshaken. For years, I let them define me, the failure, the burden, the invisible one. But the truth? They only saw what made them comfortable, not what made me real. And now, they don't get to look away anymore. I closed my laptop, stood tall, and walked toward my next meeting, my real one. Not in a boardroom, but in the life I had kept trying to build between the cracks. As the door swung open and the sunlight hit my face, I thought of Mira's words. You didn't need a big party to be seen. And maybe for the first time ever, I believed it. Sometimes the people who should know your worth are the last to see it, and by then you've already moved on. You don't need applause to prove you mattered. You don't need a mic to reclaim your story. Have you ever been the one they tried to silence, only to rise anyway? If this story spoke to you, don't forget to subscribe for more real, powerful family drama that cuts deep and heals wide.